We're now moving on to the wind-up. Alan Brown.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to commend the Right Honourable Member for Kingswood for the work he's done in this and for bringing forward the debate today, and thank the Honourable Members that have taken part in the debate. As always, the Honourable Member for Gainsborough is one that I tended to disagree with, but certainly I agreed with most other contributions. Now, in terms of the report itself, there's certainly much to like in the report. There's stuff to debate and, of course, some stuff to disagree on. But given that the review was commissioned by the former Prime Minister after her ill-informed leadership campaign pledging to remove levies from bills and alluding to the fact that net zero was a costly commitment, then I really do welcome that the report's been undertaken truly independently and has not went down that rabbit hole. So obviously the key thing is now, what does the Government do with these recommendations, especially the short-term 25 recommendations to be implemented by 2025. And it's really critical given that existing carbon budgets are actually off track, so we need to get realignment if we're going to actually hit net zero by 2050. Now, I also note the phrase Scottish Government is not actually used once in the main body of the report, and while I accept there's engagement, there's some good practice from Scotland's reference report. I would have expected some greater references and understanding where the Scottish Government is taking a lead. The rollout of EV chargers, for example, interest-free loans for electric vehicles, the embracing of onshore wind, peatland restoration, woodland planting, Just Transition Commission, the £500 million low-carbon fund for the North East energy efficiency measures, rollout of low-emission, zero-emission buses. So there's a lot of good practice in Scotland that the rest of the UK could learn from. Also, more consideration is required for the ability of devolved governments to be able to deliver because of funding constraints and the case of the Scottish Government, strict borrowing power. So that needs to be debated going forward as well. But what is abundantly clear from the report is the need for stable, long-term, consistent policy matched by funding, and that Treasury can't be a blocker. And as the Right Honourable Member rightly said, other countries are now taking the lead in investment, and obviously the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States is making that a more attractive place for renewable investment. And we know the folly of previous chopping and changing, the cutting of solar and onshore wind from the CFD auctions as part of David Cameron's cutting the green crap agenda. So that was 8 years of investment lost from one policy decision overnight, which has actually stopped the deployment of the lowest forms of renewable energy, cheapest forms of renewable energy. So at least I can say that I'm glad that in Scotland we continue to embrace onshore wind. We've made it integral to the decarbonisation of the power sector, and there is the fact, Mr Deputy Speaker, that Scotland generates the equivalent of 100% of gross electricity consumption from renewables, and that should be held up as a fantastic achievement, an example for the UK Government to follow south of the border. At least deployment of solar is now recovering, and soon the deployment rate will be something like 1 gigawatt installed per year. So in just a 3-year period, that means the equivalent of a Hinkley Point C will come online from solar. It's quicker, it's cheaper, and it can be deployed where required, providing greater grid stability. And I agree with the recommendation and the call for a plan to get to a roadmap for 70 gigawatts of deployment by 2035. And I also agree with the Right Honourable Member for Kingswood about the need for a re-envisaged roadmap for CCUS to be delivered this year. The report rightly points out the investment landscape for CCUS and hydrogen is currently unclear, and this needs remedied as soon as possible, and also that Track 2 clusters need to be expedited. It's outrageous to me that the Scottish cluster remains a reserve, and it's probably the most advanced of the CCS clusters, and one most likely to be delivered the quickest. So Acorn actually represents the worst example of UK Government policy chopping and changing and funding being withdrawn. And the reality is that the Scottish cluster needs to commence in order for Scotland to meet their 2030 target of a 75% emission reduction. And I know that the new Minister obviously knows how important the Scottish cluster is as part of that just transition and how important it is for jobs in the North East of Scotland. So I hope to hear a more positive response rather than holding the mantra that, hey, it's okay, Acorn is the reserve. Being the reserve is not good enough, and it needs to commence sooner rather than later. Also, just for the record, I do agree with the details in pages 67, 68 that we will indeed still rely on North Sea oil and gas as we transition towards net zero. Where I do fundamentally disagree with the report is a continued blinkered approach about new nuclear. New nuclear doesn't actually form a great deal or a big part of the report, and there's not much evidence, but yet it still comes out as a key recommendation in one of the suggested 10 missions. So I disagree with the phrase "no regrets" description applied to the concept of new nuclear. Now, the report rightly identifies that 4 of the 5 remaining nuclear plants are going to go offline in the next few years, and that's before Hinkley Point C will come on stream. So that, for me, that scenario alone shows that if the UK grid can cope with these existing nuclear stations going offline, then fundamentally we don't need new nuclear as this mythical baseload, because that's the proof that we can cope without nuclear. It's also, nuclear is actually not flexible enough and is actually relatively incompatible with intermittent renewables. There's still the issues and costs associated with radioactive waste. And actually, if you look at long-term performance, nuclear isn't actually necessarily there when the wind doesn't blow. Over a 10-year period, each nuclear reactor is shown to be offline roughly a quarter of the year, so it can't actually be depended to be there when it's needed. So the reality is we need to invest in other technologies, particularly storage, to balance intermittent renewables. And the reality is the nuclear market has actually failed because it's too expensive and too risky. There's not a successful operational EPR plant in the world, and yet despite that, the ongoing performance issues at Hinkley Point C, the government does seem hell-bent to sign up for Sizewell C, and using a RAB model, it's actually going to transfer risk to bill payers. There's already been £700 million of taxpayers' money thrown at the development of Sizewell C. That's money that could be better spent elsewhere. And the capital cost for Sizewell C will be at least £30 billion. So think what that money could do if invested in other technologies, in particular energy efficiency. And I do welcome the recommendations about aggressive energy efficiency targets going forward. Not only does it make bills cheaper, it means healthier homes, healthier lifestyles, and of course a demand reduction. Finally, on nuclear, the report actually rightly highlights elsewhere the issue of rising sea levels, so it actually suggests it's madness to propose building a new nuclear power station in an area that's subject to coastal erosion and at risk of rising sea levels. And also, the report actually demonstrates that nuclear energy has never got cheaper cost-wise, whereas all other technologies, including battery storage and P2X fuels, are now cheaper than nuclear. And figures 1 and 2 from the report actually make the case in itself that we don't need new nuclear, we should be investing in these other technologies.
Would my honourable friend agree?
Does my honourable friend share my disappointment that the party opposite embraces so wholeheartedly dirty, outdated technology such as the nuclear energy source and refuses to fully embrace the potential of tidal energy, which has so much potential for our renewables industry, certainly in Scotland, but right across the United Kingdom?
I wholeheartedly agree.
Respond, Mr Brown. Just remember the timings, please, that were agreed. Mr Brown.
Brief. I wholeheartedly agree, and I would like to see the government actually set a 1 gigawatt target for tidal stream. We need to follow through in the recommendation report for setting clarity and planning for long-term investment CCUS and hydrogen production, investment in pump storage hydro, supporting a cap and floor mechanism, replacing the EU funding for the European Marine Energy Centre, and something I'd hope the Minister would work with is in terms of planning consents for major infrastructure projects. Section 33 of the 1989 Electricity Act is reserved to Westminster, but it's a sign-off process that Scottish ministers need to sign off. So if we're going to speed up the consent process, it actually needs working with the UK Government to be able to do that. And hopefully the Minister will work with us in terms of the energy bill going forward. There is so much to welcome in the report. I wish I had more time to actually debate it further, and I do commend Right Honourable Member for Kingswood.